Welcome, Megan, to the podcast. It's so exciting to have you. I've been looking forward to this chat for so long. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Well, do you want to start by just sharing with everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a clinical nutritionist. So I have my own consulting business where I consult online pretty much throughout the world called I Choose Health. And I specialise in low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets, particularly for women with lipedema, also with obesity and people with type 2 diabetes.
Fantastic. And I really want to get into particularly lipedema because it's such a fascinating subject that I personally am starting to really learn more about. But before we get there, I'm always really curious as to what got you personally in the low carb space, because I think, certainly from what I've seen, there's kind of a personal story attached to most of us finding low carb, particularly because it's not generally what we're taught, at university or when we study. So I'd love, whatever you're happy and comfortable in sharing about how this has come about for you.
Absolutely. Well, I was probably first introduced to re-looking at sugar from my mum, who shared the David Gillespie book Sweet Poison with me, and that was really the start of my journey into all of this. And I've certainly been, following, originally with the paleo movement and, just watching all of that develop. And Gary and Belinda Fetke were a huge influence in my early days, as was Jennifer Elliott, the three of them probably being the most influential over me. And that was at a time when I was studying my health science degree in Nutritional Dietetic Medicine. So I was sort of simultaneously studying what I was being taught at uni, trying to only commit it to short-term memory with a lot of it. We learned a lot of good stuff as well. But with the flexitarian type approach to, the nutritional guidelines or the dietary guidelines, that didn't sit well with me, and particularly as I was going into the low carb space. I didn't, agree with a lot of that. We were taught that butter was healthy and those types of things. So we were probably a little privy to a little bit more of generous information. But we were very much taught that, you should only consume red meat maybe 3 times a week and eat plenty of vegetables and plenty of grains and that type of thing. So it was very much a dual sort of learning that I was teaching myself the science of what I loved with keto and low carb. Just all made complete sense to me at the same time as, while I was doing my studies and learning, the complete opposite in many aspects. So it was an interesting time, that's for sure. But whilst I was studying, ironically, many of us who were studying our health science degree were, you get so busy and so stressed and so overwhelmed with everything that, quite often people are at their worst health-wise because stress is so damaging, right? And early mornings and late nights and all of that type of thing. So my stress had really got out of control, and I had started to put on a lot of excess weight that was going on sort of quite rapidly. This is in my early 40s. And so I was staying with my mum at the time, finishing off my science degree, and my mum was pre-diabetic and was carrying some extra weight, and said to her, look, she had actually already been doing a low carb diet successfully for some time. But for some people, those, still being able to eat the sweet potato and things like that can still be that attachment when you've got that carbohydrate sort of addiction type thing where once you start on a carb, you just keep going and it's hard not to overdo them. I said, right, I think we should try keto for a while and just eliminate all of those sweet carbs that can keep that addiction going. And yeah, so we did that. Mum was able to reverse her pre-diabetes and lose some excess weight. And I was able to lose nearly 20 kilos as well, which was fabulous. So we were both feeling the best we ever have. We've still been keto for, so that's been over 2.5 years, I guess now. And so that's been, it's been a really beneficial thing for both of us. And then once I'd set up my clinic and was starting to help clients, a client came to me who had lipedema, or what we call Lipo Lymphedema, which is the combination of lipedema and lymphedema, which is usually lipedema, and we'll talk about that more in a moment, can progress on when excess weight starts becoming involved. And so, she had said, look, I want to do keto for my lipedema. And of course, I didn't know what lipedema was because it's not something we're taught. It's not taught in medical school. We weren't taught it with in our health science degree. Wasn't something I was familiar with. So after studying for it, and researching what it was, I learned about it and also discovered that actually it was something that I had as well. And my weight was now under control, but out of control, it really, you have that uneven fat distribution that's typically on the lower half of the body. So you can see women will very much have small waists, small upper bodies, if it hasn't progressed, to another level. And then you'll see down in the bottom half that what we call gynoid fat, which is that female sort of fat that sits on the lower half of the body, in the hips, the thighs, and the buttocks. That becomes very disproportionate to the rest of the body, and quite often, you'll see down to the ankles. For some women, it goes to the ankles, and you can have what's called an ankle cuff, where you'll see that there's excess fat on the ankle and then it tucks in and the feet are spared. So typically the hands and feet are spared. So that's quite often how you can differentiate it from obesity, because and lymphedema is that you'll have normal sized feet unless it's very progressed, down the track. So that was something, that I discovered that I had, because it's known as painful fat. So it, and there can be easy bruising and some different signs and symptoms like that. But my partner used to grab me on my leg, and I'm grabbing my leg looking down while I say that, realizing that no one can see it. But if he would grab my leg and I'd say, ow, it was really painful. And he'd say, like, I hardly touched you. And I said, I know, but it just really hurts. And that's a really common symptom. Not everyone has that pain with them. Some women have more intense pain, ongoing sort of all the time. For others, it can just be at the touch, so it can be a really painful fat. So it's that disproportionate fat, and it's a connective tissue disorder with some. There's lymphatic involvement as well. Recently, it was discovered that they can connect it to a lymphatic involvement. So it's an unusual disorder in that it's very little is known about it, and they used to say that it's a rare condition. It's been known about since the 1940s, and so they used to say it was rare, but they now estimate that it affects about 11% of women, and that's an enormous amount, of women who's affected. And the more you talk to people, the more people will say, oh, I think that's something that I may have. And if you're lucky enough to have controlled your weight, quite often, the symptoms may be slight. It's with myself that it took until my 40s, and, a lot of stress going on. Stress can be a trigger. Other hormonal events can be triggers, like puberty and menopause, perimenopause. Pregnancies, sometimes some women may have a couple of kids and they're okay, and then by the third pregnancy it may trigger. So they believe there's hormonal involvement, though that's not well understood at this stage, but we believe estrogen, possibly progesterone, are involved, but also trauma, things like trauma, like surgery, and high levels of stress can also trigger, if that's your sort of genetic, if you have that genetic susceptibility to that.
Wow, amazing. There was just one thing I wanted to say about when you were talking about your mum. Isn't it amazing the human body and how our ability to heal is so powerful? Even like I had an email the other day from a lady in her 70s, and she's saying, Tracy, I've come across you, I've heard about you. Oh, I've been dieting my whole life. I've got type 2 diabetes. I've had a terrible 10 years. My son died of cancer. Just all this traumatic stuff going on. She goes, I just want to, is there any hope? Is there hope for me? And I will always, if you're alive, there's hope in my view, and I love hearing stories about, of hearing that, when your mum reversed her type 2 diabetes with lifestyle change, because there's still so much blockaging, I think, in people's minds that actually what we eat has an effect on our health. And, I just think we've just got to keep sharing these stories. I really want to get into the lipedema, but how did your mum come across low carb in the first place?
Well, I think, Mum has always been interested in nutrition. So she really sort of introduced that into our lives. But she was an avid reader and would always be reading different books and then passing them along. And I really picked up that interest early on as well. So it was something that we shared. And so I think it then, kind of really developed from the two of us talking a lot about that and yeah, just that interest in it. And particularly as I was going through with my studies, and my voice started becoming more reliable, I guess, on, after being, researching a lot of things and actually getting a lot of it, that we were able to, to kind of work together for both of us. It was terrific, a buddy system, really for helping both of our health.
It's fantastic, because I think, the first step really is we have to personally see that there is hope and we can change. I see often, people say, oh, it's too late for me, or, I can't change. Or even doctors, putting that whole, their view onto their patients, oh, they won't change, so we won't even give them an opportunity to change.
It's so true, and I hear from a lot of my clients will say that, oh, I've been told my blood sugars, or firstly, a lot of them haven't been told they're type 2 diabetic, and their HbA1cs are really high, or they'll be told that they're actually, for their age, their blood sugars are really good, even though they're type 2 diabetic, and I just I'm just incredulous at that. I can understand it in the context of what what doctors are dealing with, and people who aren't interested in changing their health. In that context, then to give credit where it's due in that context, that is right. But I think it's important that we balance that conversation to make sure that people are aware that without lifestyle change, that is probably good for where people are in their 80s, given they're on a high carbohydrate diet, and changing diet to fix, to improve health is a bit of an inconvenient truth for a lot of people. And it's a challenging truth as well, because a lot of people don't want to change their lifestyle. And we know that because there are plenty of people who, even when they're told that if they make some changes that they can improve their health, that type 2 diabetes is not just a chronic progressive disease, that it can actually be reversed. Or it's certainly improved and reversed for many people. We know the Verta Health studies were showing that, over long-term 2-year studies were showing a 60% reduction in type 2 diabetes. And that's just over that time too. Some people may just take a bit longer to, improve their metabolic health. But some people don't want to hear that, and that's okay. But there are certainly a lot of people that would much prefer to make dietary changes if they were encouraged by the medical community that actually eating healthy fats is okay, and eating salt is okay and necessary, and that they're actually health. It's not great for our health to be on low sodium diets. Only 1 in 5 people are salt sensitive. So why is every single person being told to reduce salt? Those types of things, because they're the most challenging things that I find with introducing people to ketogenic diets, where, as you know, Tracy, that you need to have some more salt with ketogenic diets, because when you lower insulin, your kidneys change how they, instead of retaining sodium, they excrete it, and excreting a lot more fluid. So it can be a real roadblock for a lot of people to have to get their heads around that cognitive dissonance, where you tell them that it's okay to eat fat and salt, but they've been told for decades that it's not okay, and their doctor's telling them that it's not okay. So it really creates a roadblock, and that can be really challenging for a lot of people, particularly for those who are morbidly obese, or even just obese. Or even just overweight, really, and have cholesterol issues. If you've already got cholesterol issues, well, that's a whole other thing as well, because then we have that whole argument of, well, they would rather put people on statins and that type of thing. So yeah, it's tricky, but I think people really need to know that it's an option.
That's right. It's giving people the option. That's my my issue. You can't decide for people who made you, or not saying you, but people, the decider of what information they take on. But that whole discomfort when we come across something that's new to what we believe, it's so normal too. I spend a lot of my time with my clients helping them see that when you come across new information that challenges your beliefs, it does feel awkward. It does feel uncomfortable, and our brain kind of wants us to ignore it, but, we can choose not to ignore it. And I tell the story. I was just telling it to a client this morning about, because I've been in the space about 8 years, nearly 8 years. And when David Gillespie was one of my first as well. But when I, really learnt, must have been from Prof. Noakes about fat and that it was okay. And I have clear memories standing in the kitchen cooking for my kids, putting butter in the pan, and I would have that voice saying, you're killing your kids, because it was so ingrained in me. And I had to sort of see, I didn't really understand what was going on much then. So I sort of thought, okay, I've just got to do a little bit more research, make sure I am very comfortable with it. And then really it just kept coming up for a while, but I just ended up ignoring it and it went away. And that's kind of how any change happens. We have to let go of our old beliefs, but know they're going to kind of hang around a bit for a little bit, but that's okay, and use that opportunity to really just get your foundations and have the knowledge. It's one thing to be told by someone that fat doesn't make you fat or fat isn't bad for you, but really you should there's so much information out there now. Do a little bit of research yourself and don't believe anything. That's what I want. Don't stop believing everything we're told, and let's find out for ourselves. And I think when we can do that and we then take in the knowledge and allow that change to happen in our brain, we will get through it. But we shouldn't fear that, because I think, I see people using that as the excuse. It becomes a blocker, as you say, and it's like, I can't do it. I'm not gonna, it's too hard or whatever. But yeah, fascinating stuff. But I see it. It's just very, very common. And but even with doctors and stuff like that, not wanting with their head in the sand, not wanting to see this stuff. It's like, well, you don't have to, but really, as Ben Bickman says, it's so the research is set. Like we know this stuff about insulin resistance, and you just got to give people the opportunity to make their own decisions. And who wants to be on medication when there's an option to not be on medication?
Absolutely, yeah, because medications, as we know, always have side effects, and not only that, but they can cause nutrient deficiencies as well. A classic example of that is something like metformin, where you've got an option of having taking a supplement called berberine, which studies show have the same effects but without the negative side effects, and that don't cause the B12 deficiencies and things like that. So there are, and obviously you need to talk to your doctor about changing that over if anyone's ears prick up at that, and please talk to your doctor about before ever changing a medication. But it's certainly worth exploring with people who are open to making dietary changes to help with their health. And for people who are worried about those types of things, they're being a clinical nutritionist, we're trained to use diet for the dietary management of chronic disease. And so one of the things that we do is to establish baselines where you want to be looking at different health markers to have a look where someone is, because once you set a baseline with lab tests, you need to set a baseline so that you can then look at the trajectory. So you want to know whether things are staying the same or getting better or getting worse. And without that baseline, it's very hard to say what's happening, because you could do your HbA1c, for example, and it's quite high, and people say, well, that's high, that's terrible, it's whatever. But actually, they've been doing low carb for a few months and it's 1 or 2 points lower than what it used to be. Well, it's actually a really great result. So you can't just look at those things, with one off. So establishing baselines, and then particularly for things like cholesterol, can be really helpful, because we know that on the surface, just looking at total cholesterol is not what we do. We like to break that down, and we can then, look at things like the triglyceride to HDL ratios, which give us an indication of insulin resistance. We can look at cholesterol remnants, and we can do, for people who their numbers aren't looking picture perfect as the doctors want them, we can then say, okay, well, let's look a little bit further and look at particle sizes and that type of thing, LDL subfractions, and do CAC scores to check the actual calcification in the arteries. And, we can do a lot more tests beyond the normal to say, okay, well, let's look at what we know, that there are different risk factors, and it's certainly not as simple as looking at total cholesterol and LDL. That's just such a simplistic story, which doesn't paint a true picture at all. So why is that still being so relied on, and why are medications being prescribed relying on just that information? So I think for anyone who is really worried about starting low carb or keto and incorporating some healthy fats, know that those options are available, that you can explore to really assess your risk factors on a much, much more detailed level than what's currently typically being done.
Yeah, exactly. Why indeed. And also the fact that so many people, even practitioners, still rely on weight. I mean, we're so driven to look at weight as the factor, like if we're losing, just go and lose some weight and you'll be right. I remember it was only a few years ago, I just went to my local doctor because I wanted to just check my HbA1c, and I couldn't get into the one I wanted to see. So I just thought, I'll just go to this guy and get it. And he's like, well, why do you want that? And I said, well, because I'd like to see how how insulin resistant I am, and, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, but you're thin. You just stay thin. You'll be fine. And I'm just like, okay, thank you. Can I just get the test, and can you send it to me, please?
Yeah.
And even, it's just so easy to think weight is a marker, but we know that you can be thin and metabolically unhealthy.
Yes, absolutely. That's right. You can't go by appearance. That, even some people that are obese, we know can be metabolically healthy. They now sort of say, okay, well, that's probably for a limited time, that at some point that's going to change, where the metabolic dysfunction will start to come into it. But there are some obese people who are healthy. There are some thin people who have raging type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and, where people are having that ectopic fat, where they're depositing fat not on the outside, they're depositing it in and around their organs, which is obviously a really not what you want to be doing, and is certainly not good for your health to be having fat in and around your organs. So yeah, you're spot on to judge someone's metabolic health by their appearance is just so short-sighted.
So let's go back to lipedema. So obviously it's something that you're very, very, very well versed on. So I'm interested to know, like us so much, where's the research in all of this? Is there still a lot of, just sort of clinical stuff going on and speculation, if you like, or is there some research around now? So how it develops and then what we can do about it?
The research there is the research is building gradually, but there's still so much unknown about it. The exact mechanism is still not known, so it's really hard to sort of do progressive research on that when even those fundamentals aren't known. But so yeah, it's really in its infancy, I think, and there are different levels of studies that show different things as far as actually looking, under microscopes to see, or under imaging techniques to see the difference between fat cells of someone with obesity, for example, and someone with lipedema. And so what they can see is that, we have this cell, what we call hypertrophy, where the fat cells start to, get enlarged beyond what they should be. And when you start getting those enlarged fat cells, it starts creating, well, of course, it creates inflammation. Because the body wants to rectify that to bring it back to homeostasis. So it initiates an inflammatory response, and you start getting all of these macrophages coming in to help repair, and they keep getting sent in, and of course it isn't being healed, and so because it's a chronic condition, and so you start getting these irregular shaped fat cells. With obesity, you get these enlarged fat cells, but you don't get the all different sizes. So in lipedema, they seem to be irregular sizes, where you'll have some much, much larger ones than what you'll see in obesity. And so with lipedema, you start to get these nodules that you can actually palpate under the skin, which is the damaged fat cells, and that you start getting extracellular contents deposited outside of the cell, and that can lead to, you're left untreated with the inflammation and all of the the immune response that's still happening around the cells, and the extracellular contents that are deposited, that it can lead on to fibrosis, which creates further problems. And we know that we call it we call women with lipedema mother of the species. And there was a great presentation done by Dr. Leslyn Keith, who talked about mother of the species, that during time through evolution to protect mankind, that certain women were able to put these really big deposits of fat down in that gynoid fat distribution, the female fat distribution areas, that we know doesn't pose the same cardiovascular risk factors as when you're carrying it, around your midriff and that type of fat deposit. And so these women were able to put on these large storage of fat, so that in times of severe famine, they could carry the species through. And so it's a fascinating story. But when you come ahead into the modern world, these women exposed to modern diets, so to have that propensity for this added fat storage obviously is going to affect insulin, because that's our fat storage hormone. And we believe that women are much more sensitive to insulin who have lipedema, and put a lot of their fuel into fat storage. And so when that's happening with the modern diet of, put into the mix high carbohydrates, high refined foods, vegetable oils, all of these things that we know are toxic, create a toxic environment, that it's really the perfect storm, I think, for this particular subset of women who have this genetic predisposition. And, it just creates so many troubles for them, because the medical community can't help them. They're ridiculed and by everyone. There's so much, fat bias out there, even within the medical community. So many horror stories that we're told of how women are treated once they become morbidly obese, because they've just got this rapid fat storage going on, which is not their fault. They've got this metabolic thing happening, and sure, diet exacerbates that. But even for women who are following a healthy diet, but are having whole grains and rice and, all of these things that we're told is a healthy diet, they're still going to have that rapid fat deposition. So it's a really tricky time. And if you've got that happening from puberty, some girls, have it from even younger. Puberty happens really young sometimes, in some girls. And so if you're 9 or 10 years old and you've got, you're starting to develop these really big legs, straight away you're outcast and ridiculed and treated as different, and you start dieting. And of course that leads into this whole yo-yo dieting, calorie restriction. So many of my clients that I see have lived decades doing every diet out there. They're no longer eating enough. So they'll go in to try and get help, and people will say, well, clearly you need to stop eating so much. stop binge eating, stop eating, do some exercise, and you'll get better. And of course, that doesn't work. One of the trademark signs of lipedema is that it doesn't respond to standard diet and exercise. And in fact, even bariatric surgery, there are studies that show women have suffered malnourishment going through bariatric surgery. Their bodies, they've got absolutely no fat left on their upper bodies, yet their lower bodies remain untouched. And they can look morbidly obese on the lower half, and the top half is really thin. So that clearly shows that just lowering calories, which is effectively what happens with bariatric surgery as well, doesn't work, because you're not addressing the fundamental problems that are happening, and that's the insulin issues. And estrogen and insulin are closely linked, and that type of thing. So it's it's a really difficult disease.
It is. There's so much. And, firstly, I love the video you were talking about. These women are actually amazing. They're queens. I love how, I can't remember, who did you say had done that video on the evolutionary sort of aspect of this?
That was Dr. Leslyn Keith.
Oh, do you think you could send me a link to that? Because I'd love to put that in the show notes below for people who might be interested. I'd love to watch that as well. Just the understanding of that is amazing, and puts a different context on it.
That was actually at it was at a symposium, so it's not a publicly released video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but there are papers you can look at. There are books and a lot of information out there on lipedema, the mother of the species, and because you can actually see a lot of figurines that date back through the ages of women have that shape, that beautiful buxom lower half of the body shape. And so you can really see it. It's fascinating, but it's certainly very difficult for the women who have it, and desperately trying to get help. And in fact, the help that they're getting is really making things worse, because they're told to calorie restrict. And when you start calorie restricting, people come to me saying, okay, I feel like a dieting failure. I've tried every diet out there. It doesn't work for me. And so why would I want to give keto a go? I don't want to fail at another diet. And when you explain to people, that once you reduce your calories, when you're severely restricting your calories, luckily our bodies are smarter than that, because they eventually get what's going on. It recognizes that you're in this period of deprivation, and it initiates its own action. So it starts releasing hormones that will upregulate your hunger. And that's the point where people feel like they've lost their willpower, that they're starting to eat, they're suddenly craving food and they're starving and they just can't take it anymore. And they feel like failures. And it's just so... It's so sad, because actually, lipedema women are so committed. They're so committed to what they're doing and improving their health. They're doing everything they can to the T to try to help that. And of course, once hunger starts back up, and for some women that can lead into binging, but not everyone. You can't just assume everyone who's overweight, binges. That happens certainly, but not for everyone. And but it creates this famine response also, where the thyroid actually downregulates, because it's slowing down your metabolism, and so it can lead into all kinds of issues by doing those calorie restricted diets. So it's really about addressing the underlying cause, which is this inflammation and insulin issues. For some women, there is insulin sensitivity, and perhaps a little too much. But there can also be insulin resistance. And sometimes you can have systemic insulin sensitivity, but localized insulin resistance, where these particular fat cells are, might be, something like PCOS. Conditions like PCOS, for example, can have that type of thing going on, where there can be differing. You could be testing, systemically for insulin resistance and not seeing that, but there is localized insulin resistance at play. So
So if it's a localized versus systemic, the solution's kind of in the same place, isn't it? It's looking at reducing insulin. So, I'd love you to put it into some context. If, patient, I know we're going to only talk in generalized terms, and I encourage anyone listening who suspects they've got it to obviously reach out to someone like you to get some help, because there is hope and there is a different way to do things. And, 100% you're not a failure. I mean, that is just such a big thing I see in women, particularly around this. We're just being taught to not work with our bodies. There's just, it makes me really sad as well. But if someone did come to you, obviously diet and the keto diet has worked for you. You said more keto than low carb. Is that something that you see overall, that it's not really enough to go low carb if you want to try and, manage the symptoms?
Yeah, so we, a team that I was recently working with in the US, and I put out a paper that we published in the medical journal called Medical Hypotheses. And our paper, which was called Ketogenic Diet as a Potential Intervention for Lipedema. And so that was discussing this very thing that we actually believe for some women, not necessarily all, because we know other clinicians, there's a doctor in Germany who's very well known for doing ketogenic diets, and she has some success, with women at the high levels of carbohydrates that you can tolerate within a ketogenic diet. So which is typically around 50 grams of total carbohydrates that you would be getting from complex carbohydrates, so from vegetables, typically above ground vegetables. And some dairy, has some carbohydrates in there as well, and nuts and other things. But typically the main predominant carbohydrates are coming from low carbohydrate fruits and low carbohydrate vegetables. So getting into ketosis, really is key, because when you have so much chronic inflammation going on, one of the beauties of a ketogenic diet is, the ketone beta hydroxybutyrate, the main one that's circulating in our bloodstream. There are research papers that show that interrupts the inflammasome pathway, the NLRP3, it's called inflammasome pathway. So you're really targeting that inflammation and getting that inflammation lowered. And so it's the ketones that are doing that. So low carb is still going to be beneficial, because cutting back on carbohydrates, of course, is going to stop, I think, how quickly weight is being put on. But it's very hard to create that lipolysis, to create the, breaking down the fat, to get to access that fat for energy when there's such insulin resistance going on. And, with carbohydrates still coming in. And so, for women, for these particular fat cells with lipedema, we find that lowering, we call it a modified ketogenic diet. And in this instance, we put that at 20 grams total carbohydrates or even lower. And that's going to depend, also on what the metabolic health is like. So was there also type 2 diabetes involved at the same time, which interestingly though, for women with lipedema, still develop type 2 diabetes, but often it's much later in life. So there seems to be there's some sort of difference going on where that happens at a much slower rate than what it typically does for other people. But it's still, pre-diabetes is still quite common, and type 2 diabetes usually as the disease progresses.
Fascinating. So you talked about how you would obviously look at the spectrum where the client was at and their health issues to determine, where to go with diet. Is it something that you see as being like their keto forever, or is it kind of a, can we get to a point where and I'm not saying going back to our old diet, but can we get to a point where we're metabolically flexible to sort of go in and out a bit? Or do you see with this condition that really it's going to, like type 2 diabetes in a way, it's kind of, you got to get there and kind of stay there?
Yeah, well, it's such a great question. And you're exactly right that you will hear a lot of people talk about that the idea of ketogenic diet is to create that metabolic flexibility, and that ideally you shouldn't just live in one state or the other, that flittering between the two, is good. And I think for some people that's probably true, although we know that eating high amounts of carbohydrates at any time, damages the glycocalyx, which is the inner layer of the blood vessels, and that can take some time to recover. So if you're doing that, really on a regular basis, over time, that is going to cause issues in different ways, potentially for possibly everyone, I guess. But perhaps not so drastically, where it creates a condition that crops up, like type 2 diabetes and that type of thing. But like you say, for people with type 2 diabetes, for example, you've really lost that ability to maintain that metabolic flexibility in a healthy way. You can go back. Once you reverse diabetes, you don't then take another 10 or 20 years to develop it like it happened in the first place. You'll go back into type 2 diabetes very quickly if you start back up on carbohydrates. So once that sort of damage, is there, you're then predisposed to that, occurring again very quickly. So with lipedema, we call, that it's a keto lifestyle, because it really is, it's changing your way of eating really for the rest of your life. And in saying that, could there be examples of women who perhaps are younger and haven't shown that metabolic dysregulation to the same extent that others have, that perhaps get their health back under control and then maintain a low carbohydrate diet and are able to maintain their weight? I would say that there probably would be those scenarios if you have to look at the perfect storm again. If they're sleeping well, and if they don't have chronic levels of stress in their life, and if they don't have estrogen dominance or other dysregulations in hormones. And so again, it really will depend on a whole lot of stuff. But I don't think I would discount it as such. But again, we haven't been looking at ketogenic diets with lipedema really for long enough to know that. So that's why I sort of say possibly. I think that possibly could be the case if you were to. I think you'd definitely still have to stay low carbohydrate for sure. I think that's a given, and to avoid things like vegetable oils, and because of course there were some presentations at Low Carb Down Under that were talking about these societies around the world, who some of them have 90 to 95% carbohydrate intake as their main diet. And it's probably more complex carbohydrate. It's not like, putting someone on cornflakes for, 90% cornflakes of their diet and they're not going to develop that. This is, complex carbohydrate. But the carbohydrate levels are really high, which I just find fascinating, because they sort of say, well, really, the thing that seems to also make such a big difference is the vegetable oils, and that plays a role in insulin resistance. And one of the presentations I did in the US recently was looking at all of the different ways that insulin resistance can develop, and it's really mind-blowing, because we kind of just think it's related to carbohydrates, but there are so many factors that can contribute to insulin resistance. It's really fascinating.
So what else? What else do you see? I mean, yes, I know the vegetable oils and the carbs, and what else do you see that's coming out from that could be, big factors in developing insulin resistance?
Well, I think with, certainly we know that even lack of sleep and those sorts of things can do that. And when you look at stress, stress is a big one, because you're releasing, a lot of cortisol and other stress hormones. And when that happens, that can actually in itself develop insulin resistance, whether you're having carbohydrates or not, because it suppresses insulin, actually, so that the blood sugars can be high, because it wants you on alert. It wants this, energy to be ready so that you can act quickly with something's going on, you're stressed out, you've got to be able to act quickly. And so your body shuts down fat. It won't let you access the fat. storage. It wants that energy there in case it needs it, but it wants fast-acting energy as well. So it makes you, crave the sugars and that type of thing. And so that can all lead into insulin resistance as well. So, there is just, like we say, that there are so many areas to health that are, way beyond just diet. And if you focus on just diet, or even meditating without focusing on diet, or any of these things, that, unless you have the combination really of everything. Of course, the other thing as well that ties into that, and I mentioned, estrogen, a big thing for women nowadays too is that, a lot of women are on the pill. So you have this estrogen excess, and it's a thin synthetic estrogen at that. But then we also get a lot of what we call xenoestrogens and phytoestrogens from our environment. So that all comes into play as well. And so that doesn't help either with insulin resistance. That can tie into that also. So looking out for, things like not having a whole heap of soy, particularly if you're premenopausal, to be having all of these hormone mimickers. Soy mimics estrogen and binds to estrogen receptors, and that can be problematic for people, especially if you already, have estrogen dominance and that type of thing. So there are all kinds of aspects to, and medications is another one. They're popping into my head slowly, but medications is another one that some medications will increase your risk of insulin resistance as well. So there's lots of different, even statins, for example, increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. So for people who are already sort of predisposed to that or already in that scenario, then that, is another thing that's going to increase that. And that, things like steroids increase type 2 diabetes and increase, all of that sort of stuff. So it's very tricky.
It's a lot. Yeah, it is tricky. And, I'd hate for people to sit there and go, oh, it's just too much. I don't think it's like that. I think what we're just saying is you just need to be aware that, it's probably just not one thing. And if you've been looking at diet and not getting the results you want, so maybe we need to start looking at, I think people tend to go to diet maybe because it's the most obvious and it's probably the one they can control a little bit more easily than, stress. I mean, stress, I love talking about stress because there's so much around, how we see it too, like everyone will see the world differently, because we see it through our own filter, and there's so much space to look at stress in a different light, because we can't change the world, right? We can't change what's going on, but how we adapt to it and how we see it, I think, can be really beneficial. So, there's always things that we can see and always things we can do. But if we don't even know, how do we know we can do something about it? So, that's why I love chatting to people like you, just so we can increase people's awareness around options. But I also wanted to ask you about the thyroid, because you mentioned when you were talking about traditionally with calorie restriction and it can affect our thyroid. I mean, I see so much people say, oh, but you can't go long-term keto, can't lower carbs long-term because it's going to negatively affect your thyroid. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what your knowledge in that area, and is that true?
Well, the thing is, there are so many things that affect thyroid. So, we're happily handing out advice for people to eat less. That affects thyroid, but suddenly, but ketogenic diets are targeted as well. And, there are studies that show that that T3 levels can drop on ketogenic diets, and there's not a lot of study around this per se. There are plenty of people doing keto that don't develop a thyroid condition. So I don't think it's fair to blame keto. Perhaps how people do it, or the fact that they're chronically stressed and they're not maybe including enough selenium and zinc and the nutrients that we know supports thyroid health and thyroid hormone conversion. So, I'd be more inclined to be looking at that. So T3 levels have been noticed to drop, but in those studies, I don't know if they were measuring what nutrient intakes they were having that also supports thyroid health as well. But they speculate as well that that's perhaps because, like improving insulin sensitivity, that perhaps we're improving thyroid hormone sensitivity. So even though there can be changes in those levels, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. You can't just assume that that's a bad thing. So there are more studies that are needed in that to really find out what's sort of long-term effects are going on with the thyroid health. But as I said, I think that's kind of tricky as well, because there are so many different factors also that lead into thyroid health, and things that can impact that. Remembering too that because things like gut dysbiosis can happen from, if you're not sleeping well, if you are stressing your body, which can be over exercise, or it can be just, any emotional or physical stress, or any trauma or past trauma that's going on, work and all of that sort of thing. And perhaps you've had some medications because you've had an infection lately, and you've taken some antibiotics and those sorts of things. And then if your diet might be, maybe you've got a bit of a sweet tooth, but it's not excessive, but there's still, some sugar elements in there, which for a lot of people there are. And even, people doing paleo, for example, can still be having lots of sweet potato and lots of honey and those sorts of things. But you can be, getting that gut dysbiosis, what we call, when the microbiome isn't as well balanced as what it should be. And when you start getting that imbalance there, you can start jeopardizing your gut health. And then, other things can come into play, like dairy, for example, which can be part of a really healthy diet. I know, but if you're starting to get gut issues, dairy does have some components, as everyone knows about lactose intolerance, when you're not able to produce the enzyme lactase, or not enough of it to deal with the amount of dairy that you're eating. So you can deal with a little bit of it, because like with most food intolerances, usually, unless it's become, really pronounced, that you can deal with a little bit of something, it's the dose is in the poison, right? So but once you go over a threshold, it's no good. So the carbohydrate in the dairy is the lactose, that's the sugar. And some people can't deal with that because they're lacking the enzyme. But then some people have problems with the proteins, which is the dairy and whey. But also, dairy can also has what we call protease inhibitors. And so if you're eating a lot of dairy, these protease inhibitors will actually affect the digestive enzymes that are produced. Protease is a digestive enzyme that helps to break down the proteins. And so for some people, that can get out of balance. And so that can mean that you're then starting to have trouble digesting proteins. And if you've got gut dysbiosis, and if you've got leaky gut, and then you've got these bigger particles swimming around that haven't been broken down properly, because it's the proteins, of course, that really these food intolerances are coming from. An undigested protein is not a good thing that you want in your body. And particularly for people with, autoimmune disease. In fact, they sort of speculate that they think that autoimmune disease really starts perhaps in your gut from, allowing the epithelial lining of the gut to get damaged, or that the tight gut junctions, which are really, really well sealed and only certain things can get through, but they become what we call leaky, and larger particles get through that shouldn't be getting through, allowing things into the bloodstream. So there can be a lot of different reasons, and sometimes not even the obvious ones. So you really have to start going by symptoms. But even then, we're so good at we're so used to the symptoms that we've got, and we downplay them. Yeah, exactly. You normalize them and almost forget that you've got them, and so it's good to really break that down and look at what's going on. That's why that holistic approach is really good, because you want to know not only what someone's bowel movements are like, and what their sleep patterns are, and what their stress levels are, and all of the different things you need to look at to see what someone's health is and where it might be playing out, because it's different for everyone. There's some really unusual symptoms from food intolerances that can occur. There can be nasal polyps, for example, can be linked with salicylate intolerances. And yeah, it's really sort of different things that you would never think could be associated with food, ringing in the ears. Sometimes obviously there's functional reasons for that. But once those things are discounted, you can really explore food intolerances to see what might be, contributing to joint pain and all the different symptoms that can show up for people.
That's fascinating. And it's such a journey, like I've been on it, really for the last 12 months, just this detail, I took everything out and then I played with reintroducing. I mean, I did it with help. I didn't do it on my own because that knowledge is a little bit deeper than what I had, but I found it fascinating. And I think I had days when I was just like, oh, it's too hard. I don't want to do this. And, I want to, because I loved dairy. And, dairy is a big part of the standard keto diet. And it was a big part of my diet. And yeah, I took it out and I missed it. And I've kind of got to a point now, so I don't eat much of it at all, but I managed to tolerate a little bit of cream in my coffee. And as long as I can do that, I'm all right. I'm happy with it.
Yes, yeah, I can totally relate to that. Yeah, but dairy is such a good bridge for people going low carb or keto. I find that cutting out the carbs, you've kind of got, I can't have bread, but I can have cheese. It's a pretty good trade-off. And so for some people, I think just transitioning with dairy can be okay because it does make it, if that's the way that gets you to low carb and keto, well, I think that's great. And I think, some people can experience worsening of symptoms when they go low carb or keto, but really by making any dietary change. And that's just because you need to know what we call the bio-individuality. What does your body respond to? Just because you're eating whole foods doesn't necessarily mean that, given the damage of perhaps where your gut is at or where your health is at the moment, that not all foods are health foods to everyone.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's what people don't quite understand, that it can, really I hate it when I see people who kind of give up because they've just done the standard advice and they think, oh, it doesn't work for me, so I'm going to throw it all in. But, really, if they saw someone like you and just had a little bit of knowledge on how to tweak it and make it individual, and then I think, really step into this thinking that there is no one size fits all. You're going to have to play with it and you'll evolve. So what you start with is great, but it may change from that. And, I don't know. I think people argue a lot about, little nuances that really, in the scheme of things, for the big picture, they don't matter so much. But it's been fascinating chatting to you. I would love to chat longer, but I'm very conscious we've talked for nearly an hour and I really probably need to let you go. But I'm hoping you might be able to end with some, any advice for where can they go? How would they start?
Well, I think the first thing to know is that there are people out there who understand what's going on for you. And if that's not who you're currently seeing at the moment, then you need to keep looking. It's okay to see other health professionals. I think a lot of people feel really stuck. We feel so connected to our health practitioners that even if they're no longer servicing us or they can't recognize our needs or our health has gone to a place that they don't specialize in, we feel, that we have to sort of keep keep staying there, but that's not the case. So it's explore other health practitioners who specialize in what you feel like's going on and reach out to someone like me. I'd be more than happy to help to direct you to other health with something like lipedema. It's a multi-modality type condition. You need to be seeing occupational therapists and or physical therapists, and there are different things that you need to be doing to help with the self-care of your body as well as what you're eating. It's not just about the foods that you're eating. So just keep looking. You will find the right person to help you.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like our hairdresser sometimes or our personal trainer. We think they're going to be hurt if they're not, right for us anymore, and we need to find someone else. And I think, we need to. There's nothing wrong with it. They're big people. They'll get over it. And I think, right. That's great advice. It's been so fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your knowledge. Down below, I've got all the details that you can use for people to get into touch with you. So I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.